Why do you think architecture isn't beautiful anymore?
It's tough, isn't it? I mean, obviously there'll be some things that are built now that are beautiful because that's maybe the main intention behind it. You know, like artists will sculpt things, or certain buildings will be built with an artistic intention. But maybe it's a consequence of our like greater inclination for just doing what's profitable and easier, and like we can fit X number of houses or flats in this area if we put them like this in a very uniform way. And is it maybe a sort of less greater emphasis on religion and things like this, and great sort of ritualistic communities that mean that we don't build buildings like cathedrals anymore because we have them already, and maybe they're a sort of a dying part of our society, the attendance and appreciation for buildings and things like that have a very divine connotations and things. I think it's a combination of all of those things. I don't think it's completely died. I think there's still beautiful sort of things being built out in the world, but it just seems like generally I look at things like cathedrals and it baffles me that even a human being at that time was capable of building a structure like that in the 1400s or even earlier. And there's a sense of awe when you're in these places that you just don't get in modern buildings as much, from what I gather. I mean, what do you think?
I think you're right in terms of the reason. It's because of profit and functionality is the reason why. I mean, maybe we don't need more cathedrals, and maybe it's fine the way it is now. If there was so many, then we wouldn't appreciate them. But I go into like an average hotel and I see like a picture that is like just like a shitty beach with like, it's kind of like art for art's sake just on the wall. And then you go into like a fancy restaurant where they're playing like mainstream pop music, and you're like, why can't you play like some Beethoven or some flamenco? Like, why does it have to be this this very high beat music to try and make you eat and get out as fast as possible? It's high tempo, and it's all sort of gone to efficiency. And there is exceptions. I looked into this a little bit, and there's this good example of Wetherspoons. And if you've ever been to Wetherspoons, they don't actually play music. And well, why is that? Basically, the CEO, he's a guy called Tim Martin, and he was influenced by this George Orwell essay called "The Moon Underwater," which is Orwell's depiction of like the perfect pub, and in that he says that the perfect pub shouldn't have music, which is that's quite an interesting reason, I guess. Like, there's more music, I guess it's more pure. I don't really know the reason, but that was why Wetherspoons don't have music. But I think I'm with you in that you see buildings and you're like, how did humans make that? Like, how did what's that massive? Is it like St Paul's Cathedral, that massive one in London? Yeah.
Mental.
And there's, how the fuck did humans make that? And there's also like
but multiple, like when was let's Google this. When was St Paul's built? The construction began in 1675 and was completed in 1710. So 35 years. Like 1675. That's three and a half hundred years ago of lower like innovation than we have today in terms of construction tools and just the labor industry was not. It's mental to me that something like that was built then. Yeah,
the same with like if you're still on Google now, Google the Cologne Cathedral. It's this massive
Cologne in Germany.
Yeah, in Germany. Yeah.
Whoa.
That shit's like out of a movie. That shit's like.
Yeah, mental.
It's incredible.
Just to go back, it literally is mad. Just to go back to your point on the hotels and music and restaurant thing, I think also an element of it is companies will they'll look to be uniform in the experience they provide people wherever they go. So if you're like a chain hotel, you will have the same decor and layout inside and outside that's kind of cheap to run. And will give people a familiar experience every time, because when they go to a travel lodge or a holiday inn or whatever, they know what that person then knows basically what they're going to get. If they all look different architecturally and had different interior design and stuff, there's kind of People wouldn't like that. They like the certainty of knowing where they're going when they purchase a hotel room or whatever with the chain company. And also, on the music point, I think people go with what's safest. So like pop music is pop music for a reason. It's pop music because it's popular, right? And even though it may not be the preference of you or I, it's still on average going to be what somebody doesn't mind listening to. Whereas if you played something a bit more obscure, or maybe is seen as a bit more, I don't know, old school, vintage kind of tunes, like you're going to appeal to less people than pop music would, even though to us it would make a nicer experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think these are
kind of playing it safe.
they're like mainstream places, so they're going to be mainstream rather than niche, I guess, essentially. So yeah, I think you're right.
Exactly.
And maybe that's fine, but I can't. I just go into like a travel lodge and I'm like, what's the point of that picture being up there? Because it doesn't make me think anything. It's a beach.
Yeah.
Like it might as well, if it wasn't there, it wouldn't change the way I think or anything. But I think that's why Europe's so like romanticized, because it has more of this like stuff that's appreciated with time. And yeah, I guess the question is that comes from this, like I think as individuals we want to be surrounded with something that has a soul. Like we want to like not be kind of stuck in these like cancer states surroundings, because it just kind of I don't think if it was all around me all the time, it would just kind of wouldn't make me feel good. So I think
there's actually there is I'm not fully like I'm not fully aware of the research, but I know that there is a link between urbanization and urban environments and mental health disorders, and a greater risk of like anxiety and depression living in massively built up like city kind of landscapes compared to living in the countryside and being close to nature. So there is actually something to that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the obvious solution, to get in nature. Like, and I think the reason that is because if you think about like the post-clarity of after you've had a nature walk and after you've had a walk down council estate streets in like what's the shit? Yeah, there you go, Birmingham.
Like, it's tough, man. What if you're born in like a poorer family? Like, you know, your family's at a lower socioeconomic status level, and moving out of the country just isn't really a possible thing because the work in your area is not good, and it's just logistically not possible. Maybe your parents you've got two, you're in a single parent family and they can't work because they've got kids to look after, and there's so many logistical circumstances that are outside of people's control that just mean that they're stuck in the environments they're in. It's really tough to. I mean, that's something that I picked up on watching Joker yesterday, the original Joker film from 2019, not the shitty new one that came out last year, because that film is about a guy going through mental health problems, but not being able to get out of the tough situation he's in. The fact he lives in a tiny like flat block in the middle of Gotham City that's so built up, and no one has this decency, like human decency about them, and the government don't give a shit about the people's welfare, and all of that. It's tough. It's tough to it's in theory it's a nice idea of like getting to nature more, but what if you're stuck in a life in a city council estate? It's just deep, man.
I think you can change the thing. You can only change the things you can control. That's a good point. But one of them would be like, instead of listening to aggressive music, like and wearing like these sloppy like tracksuits, like you can I don't know, you can adjustable things, like it's yeah, I think the Joker example is quite good. Did you like see? You kind of feel sorry for the Joker, don't you, in that movie?
Yeah, because is he the bad guy? He's like, he doesn't. Yes, he murders people throughout the film, but like every time he does, you can see why his motivations emerged. It's not like you're saying it's justified, because it's not, obviously. But you can see why. You can see the foundations of his feelings and his internal narrative emerging. You can see what leads him to do the things he does, which then raises really interesting questions about where we place blame and responsibility about things. He is a guy that is mentally unwell, but the society around him isn't recognizing that, and and doesn't know what to do about it, or maybe can't do anything about it, or isn't, the funding isn't there, or just the time and attention isn't there, and then everything just gets crazier and crazier and crazier and more chaotic out in the world than in his own head, until there's riots, and he goes on and does the things he does. So that film is not about superheroes. It's not even about supervillains. It's about society, and it's about the human mind. It's a psychological thriller.
Yeah, he's kind of the antagonist and the protagonist. One thing I've been watching, there's a TV show called Adolescence, which I'm very late to. It's supposed to be like the biggest thing on Netflix this year, and that's about kind of this 13-year-old that kills a girl, and it's because of it's basically about masculinity and the problem that young people have, and all these old people are not aware of it. And it's kind of the same kind of like psychological thing of this problem hasn't been recognized and it hasn't been dealt with properly in society. So all these boys it shows like the hyper extent of a school classroom of people just not respecting the teachers at all, and then with the exaggerated sort of representation of getting mad at a girl that said something to you and killing her. And I think final thing I'd add is with the kind of controlling your surroundings, what you consume, things like that. It's I watched you said it to me like maybe a couple of weeks ago. It was Guy Ritchie on Rogan about wearing a suit like it's
wanting to wear the suit.
Yeah, you want to wear a suit like it's like a soldier wears his armor. You should wear a suit like a soldier wears his armor. And I think it's this voluntary, like, I'm going to do this so it makes me feel powerful and it makes me want to grind and be a professional. And that's it's a good way to approach life. So you've got your goal of, okay, I'm going to go to the coffee shop and get XYZ done. I'm going to drink my espresso because that's what this type of person does. Like, you drink your espresso like a sort of mafia man would drink his whiskey, and you got your suit on like a soldier wears armor, and then it all comes together into this kind of like
it's a psychological frame. It's a narrative you place over your life. It's a narrative of taking ownership, and we know the link between like ownership and taking responsibility of something, and then deriving meaning and fulfillment from it. And those things are inextricably linked, right? So I know this in myself. I know this, that when I struggle with motivation in the main, let's say, two buckets in my life of the things I do, the athlete side of me and like the cognitive student side of me, the only times I have low motivation is when I'm not seeing those things as the gifts that they are. Like, I'm not wanting to wear the suit. I feel obliged to go and train. I feel like I have to go and train, or I feel like I have to do this uni assignment or read this book or whatever. But when I actually see them as I want to do this, I suit up and get my sports kit like it's a soldier going to war or whatever. Like, you take ownership of that situation, and I'm training for a specific purpose because the game of basketball is beautiful and it's given me so many opportunities in life. Then I feel better about it. Or when I learn something, it's not just about learning that specific thing, it's the meta skill of learning itself, being able to absorb information and how that fragment of information then fits into the larger web of knowledge in my brain that makes me a more articulate and valuable person in this particular field. And so there's something massive to that, of wanting to be here, wanting to do the things you do. It completely changes the whole context around it.
I believe before I go into my main point, you had something written down about neuroplasticity that we didn't get to last week.
Yeah, I mean, I can try and go into it. I mean, it actually isn't loads to it, and I don't know if I fully thought, like I put on the thing, I've not fully thought this through, so it's a bit shit, we can just cut it out or ignore it. But I can go into it briefly now if you like.
Sure.
So it's basically like about the fact that human beings are so vulnerable when we're born. Like, it's really interesting. You look around the animal kingdom or look at the sort of world of mammals, and you compare a human baby and like a giraffe calf and a monkey child, or any sort of zebra being born, or a horse being born, or a cow being born, or like, all these animals have so much more physical function than we do when we're born. Human babies are basically a potato for 6 months, that need other people so desperately to keep them alive. There's this delay of maturation in a human being until we're maybe 3 or 4, when we can then be a bit more mobile out in the world and build social connections in like school or whatever, and start being properly socialized. We're basically stuck to our parents for the first 2-3 years of life. And then we don't really say that somebody's fully matured until 18 or maybe even 21 or maybe even 25. Whereas the comparison I'm trying to draw is, you look at when a giraffe is born, the baby can walk already. Yes, it might struggle a little bit to stand and fall over a few times, but on the day of its birth, a giraffe's baby can walk. And these ideas were kind of put forward in relation to neuroplasticity in a podcast that I listened to, where the guy was basically saying that once something like a giraffe is born, it is then largely a what's the right word? A puppet of its biological conditioning from birth, from the innate mechanisms that are there, from the genetic code and the sort of the instincts, is the way that we think about it a lot in the animal kingdom. Then once it's born, its maturation is done in terms of putting in those biological mechanisms that it will just carry out throughout its life. It will know it needs to hunt for food, it needs to avoid predators, and it wants to reproduce and all this kind of stuff, and it will just kind of carry out those processes largely unconsciously, because animals are less neuroplastic than humans. Those kind of mechanisms don't change quite as much. Whereas with us, we have such a greater capacity for neuroplasticity that, and this was the argument of the guy on the podcast, was it's almost like we're born so much earlier in the maturation kind of, process than other animals, because the more a human being is exposed to the world, the more the mechanisms of neuroplasticity can kind of allow us to adapt to that cultural environment. We can develop skills that are so fine-tuned and like specific to our culture and to the society that we live in, the demands of that society, and it's neuroplasticity that allows us to do that. It's like we come out half-baked in a way, and like there's all this really, really essential biological development in the womb, but then we come out and it's almost like we're culturally developed then, and then our process of maturation doesn't end until we're 18 years old. We've already been on Earth for 18 years. And it's neuroplasticity that allows that to happen and means that it's adaptive for us to be born so vulnerable, because it's almost like we're born as a more malleable being in a way. Like when a giraffe's born, it's just got this set of mechanisms that it will then carry out. Whereas with us, because our brain can absorb so much and change physically, because of experience, it's like we can pick up so much insight from our environment when we're growing up. And that allows us to be such a huge force in the world, because we can learn so quickly and adapt. So I don't know. That's a lot of yap, and I don't really know what I'm talking about. But that's the point that I was going to make last week.
Nah, it was really good. It was really good. That's interesting, because the animal mind seems like has a head start on the human mind, whereas the human mind might take like a lot longer to get to the point of the animal mind, but it's got way, way, way more potential in neuroplasticity.
Yep.
So it can excel with that. Yep. And the differences in consciousness. There is this philosopher called Locke, and he describes this infant mind as a blank slate. I don't know what language it's in, but he says tabula rasa.
Yeah.
Which means blank slates, and it's like that. It really is. Whereas, the animal's just so fast at adapting. It's like it's born and it kind of just already stands up. Like humans, a toddler might take a long time to walk. The giraffe, he literally stands up and goes. And
it's interesting, isn't it? That it's just interesting. I think the beginning of this thought process, this discussion, is the fact that the most advanced species of animal in the world is born in some of the most vulnerable ways. Like a human baby is not surviving on its own for a while. Because even in our culture today, would you let a 12-year-old make its own decisions in life and just put it out into the world? I mean, maybe it would survive physically, but is it really going to be nurtured and have a good place in society? It's going to be very difficult to do that. So we wait until we're 18 or 21 or whatever to actually kind of take a full bite out of our own lives and really have it in our power. It's just really interesting. And I think there's a relationship between that. And obviously this guy's point I listened to was because of neuroplasticity, and actually it's adaptive for us to be born so vulnerable because we're almost still developing, and we're developing in the specific environment that we're born into with a specific set of skills we need to learn based on our education system or what the society needs and how sort of, the economic situation and what sort of skills are valuable in that market. Because there's no way you could teach a giraffe how to code, but a human being, like, we're able to learn things like computer code and stuff, which is so specific to our culture. If we were just following instincts and purely just carrying out innate mechanisms like much of the animal kingdom, we wouldn't be able to adapt so quickly to things like AI and whatever the hell that is. And that's why things accelerate so quickly, and why it's so terrifying.
David Hume, he words the human mind the best way I've heard it worded, and is that the human mind is just a mirror of the external world. That's all it is. So knowledge comes in, output comes out, or sort of action comes out. Whereas I don't think the animal really has this mirror. It seems like it has its kind of, the animal has its kind of future already designed for it. It almost like doesn't have free will. Like it, whereas.
Well, I have a bit I can add to this, which I know what you're trying to get at, because it was last year at Exeter, my first year of uni, we looked at, it was an animal behaviour module, we looked at what are called fixed action patterns, where an animal develops this innate pattern of behaviour because it's adaptive for their survival and reproduction, but then they can't, once the behaviour has been activated, they can't then cancel it. They have to go completely through with it. And the stimulus that activates it is quite broad, so it can then get confused and enter into this action pattern in a context where it's not necessary or a bit odd. So, for example, the best example I can give is the common robin bird that we associate with Christmas time and stuff, the one with the big little red breast, quite a small little thing that flies around. They have a fixed action pattern, males do, to recognize the red chest of other males to attack them during like their mating season. Right? They have this mechanism that makes them attack that color of red, because that's them sort of fighting off competition for mates, essentially. So it's a very adaptive action, like fixed action pattern if it happens in the right context. But you can find loads of videos online of robins attacking Royal Mail workers because their uniform is the same red or the same sort of complexion of red as like a competitive male. And so the robin will start attacking this postman, even though it's not a competitive male and they're not competing for the same mate. But because of that mechanism, that this fixed action pattern they have to carry out, they just see the stimulus and it stimulates an instinct and they just act. Whereas I think human beings, we do have things, I think we do have fixed action patterns a lot of the time. And maybe that's what addiction is, when you get stuck in these same patterns over and over again, and you rely on them for your kind of psychological stability. But I think we have more of an ability to stop and pause and go, okay, maybe we want to fine tune our behavior in a different way. And that's maybe that self-awareness and the sense of self we have as human beings that makes us different from the animal world. But does that help the point you were trying to explore there? Because I get what you mean when you're like, animals are set in kind of their ways when they're born. It's very difficult for them to then transcend their own conditioning. Whereas humans, we kind of can do that if we want to.
Yeah, I think it seems like these drives that are in us, humans can control more than animals, and animal is just, when you put your food down, when you give your cat some food, it's there, it's right there, it's eating it, it's acting on, that's what I mean, act on impulse. They act on impulse, they can't not act on the impulse, whereas we can. And I wanted to ask, like, is the animal brain, I'm guessing it doesn't have like the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, all these different brain parts that a human has. Like, do you know if there's any like big differences with the animal brain?
Well, I don't want to say anything too like out there and wrong, because I'm not I'm not an expert. I'm just some random psychology student that has a lot of yap. But I guess the general sense is that they have the more primal brain structures that we do, or things that are very similar to them. So they would have something like an amygdala, like an emotional center that regulates like fear responses and things like that, and the brainstem and the cerebellum and all that kind of stuff. But then what we call the higher order parts of the brain, the cortex, will be less developed in many animals and will be absent in many other animals as well. The human cortex is massive in comparison, and part of that is this frontal lobe area. That's particularly big in humans. So yeah, there is something to that. I mean, and that's where a lot of our abstract thinking comes from and our moral reasoning. One thing I was just going to say is, you were talking about like, a cat being compelled to eat food if it's put in front of it. There's no way if we take like a hungry lion, right, and put a steak in front of it. No, but if we take a hungry lion and put a steak in front of it, but then try and explain moral philosophy about the cruelty of animals, and that there are some people that choose to be vegan or vegetarian, a lion's going to have no idea what that means. It doesn't care. It will just see the steak and eat it. It doesn't have reasoning on those kind of levels, which is a very human function. When we can do that, and we can decide to do things like be vegan or vegetarian, even though it goes against our biological conditioning to see a piece of meat and want to eat it. So it's interesting.
And where does the kind of neuroplasticity kind of change things? Like, because a child does kind of act on impulse a lot more, but is there something that the neuroplasticity has kind of separated us from almost kind of just an animal to an animal that has sort of grown up in society with higher, like, things that guide it? Yeah.
Well, I think the notion that children act on impulse more probably just comes from the fact that the world is so novel to them. Everything's so new. Everything's like, oh, what's this new shiny thing that I've never seen before? Let's jump at it and figure it out. Let's try and explore it. Let's touch it. Let's put it in our mouth. Let's run around it and see why. Like, everything is so new and exciting, and so you're not stuck in the same patterns of perception and action like adults are. Like, we get so rigidly held in the ways that we think about the world, the ways that we behave. I don't think we realise that sort of childhood novelty and that novel perspective on reality that we have as a child. And was your question what neuroplasticity has to do with it? I think that's because it allows us to adapt to an ever-changing environment. Like the life and the demands of an animal, if human intervention isn't too drastic in their sort of habitat and their life, is pretty straightforward and has been that way for thousands of years. An insect, if a bee is born, it knows that it needs to pollinate and it needs to bring back pollen to the hive, and feed the queen or whatever, so she can keep giving birth to new worker bees and shit like that. Like, it's pretty set what their life's going to be. Whereas with us, our culture, with me and you at 20 to our culture at me and you at 50 or 40 or 30, even 10 years from now, is going to be very different. And so, there's going to be a very different set of skills expected from us, different set of understanding of the world is going to have to be different. Like some moral questions about how much AI affects our lives or what we do politically. Like, there's always, the human culture and the human world is always changing so drastically, and that's only possible because of neuroplasticity, because our brain can be molded and we can learn and adapt so quickly. It doesn't require a new being to be born with a new genetic code. It can happen structurally in our brains, in our lives today.
Yeah, I like that point. I'll move on to my main point.
Yeah,
so
go for it, man.
It's about Cartesian skepticism, which every time I say that, it just means what kind of Descartes' philosophy about like existence and how he's always skeptical about existence, and he's quite an interesting philosopher. He makes me think a lot. He makes me think almost probably more than Nietzsche. Like he's very like mind fucking though. Like there's so many different parts to it, and you're talking about sort of different like levels of reality, and it gets like very sort of hard to get your head around at times. But I think I've kind of got my head around some of his points. So to kind of introduce like what his kind of mode of thinking is like. So the only thing you can trust is that you're just the spirit that's interpreting the world. You're just a thing that thinks. You can't separate yourself from thinking. Only thing you can know is that you exist, and that's the only thing that's certain. And he argues that if our senses have tricked us, like even once, then like, how can we trust them at all? So if you're just like cloud watching and your mind puts these clouds together and forms an elephant, that could be like the clouds haven't changed at all. It's just your brain's kind of deceived you to construct like a false image. And so he says the earth, the sky, the stars, and all other objects which I was in the habit of perceiving by the senses, but what that was, that I clearly perceived in them nothing more than the ideas and thoughts of these objects were presented in my mind. So it's all about how things like, not the external physical world as something that exists, but how it affects your mind, and he uses the example of wax and how how the physical thing of wax itself, it changes form, it melts and reshapes, and but you still know it's wax even though it has a different physical form, and that's not through the senses, it's through the mind. And so wax exists not because you can touch it and see it, but because you can doubt it, and it makes you think. That's the thing about that he always says in correlation to the mind, has to either make you doubt or make you think. And if your perception of the wax seem more distinct, then now you know yourself more distinctly. So how these things, for it to be real, it kind of have to change you. Like if you was to see like a bit of art, that would change you. That would change the way you think. It would change the way you doubt. And then that's more real than something that doesn't. So and that transference of seeing something and then making you think, Descartes refers to that as like a divine essence. That's what he calls it, the divine essence. So from all this kind of bits of theory, my conclusion, which I differentiate from Descartes' conclusion, Descartes' conclusion is there's multiple, but there's he says like a cause must have at least as much reality as its effect. So something more real can come from something less real, and I think that there's my conclusion is that there's different extents of real. There's different levels to real, and I think if we take an example of a structure where I'm holding a pencil, and you think to yourself, well, this pencil right here is physical, it definitely exists. But, what about the intangible of a flow state that I'm getting when I'm drawing? Well, is that on the scale? Is that more real or less real than the pencil? And I think the flow state is more real than the pencil. And then you go next on the scale and you say, well, what the meaning I get from drawing and the meaning I get from being in the flow state. And I think that's then even more real than the flow state on the pencil. And then you got the muse dropping ideas into my head about what to draw. And I would say that's more real than everything. My kind of mode of thinking was like that. If you need to have the drawing activity, I wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't put me in the flow state, and then it wasn't to be meaningful, and then the ideas weren't coming anyway. So that's with that example. And then you can go with, well, something like if I take if I really have a really strong desire for a Cadbury's cream egg right now, what's more real, the Cadbury's cream egg or the desire for the Cadbury's cream egg? Well, I would say the desire, because without the desire, well, the chocolate wouldn't exist because I wouldn't be buying it. And so you have this different hierarchy of things that exist, and the average person says, well, no, the Cadbury's cream egg, that I can prove it. I can prove it's there. I can kind of prove flow state, and that's kind of real. But I don't know about the meaning, and I definitely don't know about I definitely don't know about the muse putting ideas into my head. I can't prove that. But I go, no, the metaphysical is more real than the physical. And if you, I thought the example of, well, if I'm in a restaurant, I'm in this physical environment, but if I'm daydreaming, then I'm no longer in the restaurant. I'm in the daydream. If you see someone on a menu and it reminds you of a previous relationship, then you're no longer in the restaurant anymore. You're the restaurant doesn't exist. What exists is the emotion of the hatred of your ex. That emotion has teleported you into a different reality.
And a point I can add to that is, let's say you're in the same restaurant, but you go to have a meal with your mum, right? Or you go to have a meal with a colleague at work to discuss a project, or you go out for a meal with your partner or a girl that you like. The context around each of those situations is gonna affect the way that you feel emotionally in that situation drastically. depending on, your relationship with your mum or how you feel about that work project or you feel about this girl or whatever. But the restaurant, the real thing in a materialist sense, stays the same. But your experience of the restaurant, which in your argument is more real because it's your first-hand, your emotional on a cellular experience level, is different. So then what's more real, the context and the emotion or the physical place? Yeah, keep going.
I reckon this metaphysical world, I think this is where old people live in more. I think that's why these old people are all kind of chill and satisfied with just like going to a bar and then circling around and pushing their sort of walking stick around the park, and that's happy to them because they're not really living in that physical world. They're living in the mental world of the last like 70 years. And all the emotions that rotate and contemplate their past with that. And I think that this is exactly what Plato meant with the theory of the forms. You have this physical world at the bottom, the lower form of, I'm going to spend my day in my room eating chocolate, and that's a total lower form. Then a higher form that gives you loads of depth in the present moment with passion and justice and all these metaphysical like feelings. And then the question is, well, what do you do about that? Because then we'd come to the conclusion of we want to live in this higher form of great metaphysics. Like, how do we get away from the physical world? And how do we do this? And
it's tough, isn't it? Yeah, go on, finish your point because I have a lot.
That was a good break to let you talk.
Well, I was going to say, like, okay, with this all being true, well, true is a weird word to use in that complex, but let's say if we take your argument into consideration, right, and we're saying that things that are less physically real and objectively real, things that we can't measure, and the things that are more subjective and I feel more real to us because they're more meaningful and they're more emotionally salient than the physical world and physical resources and stuff, then what should we value most? And the obvious answer then is to value the things that can't really be measured. And then, okay, well, are we then still talking about this unspeakable world? This Alan Watts talks about this idea of the right hemisphere world that cannot really be explained or pinned down or measured. That's in its entire context, in its overwhelming, awe-inspiring, meaningful context. And then your question of, well, what do we do about that is a really interesting one because we are physical beings. We have to be grounded in our own physicality, our own mortality, our own biology. We have to exist in this world. We have to eat. We have to sleep. We have to shit. We have to drive to the supermarket and buy food. We have to go and work a job to earn money so we can pay rent. And so, like, we have to be engaged in the physical world in some way. But we also have to know that the real valuable shit is abstract. It's meta. It's not grounded in the physical world. It's in our own minds. It's in our spirit. It's in the unspeakable plane that exists above everything else. That's oriented by your spiritual state of presence, your state of being, your relationship to other people, your relationship to nature. And it's a true thing, Jacob. I think this is what spirituality is, minus the woo-woo. Like, I hate that sort of spirituality is so attached to this idea of, people trying to sell you crystals and shit, and like, books like The Secret by Rhonda Byrne and all that kind of stuff, and the law of attraction, all this kind of shit. Like, that's not what we mean at all. We're just two guys reading about philosophy and reading about these ideas and actually thinking about our own experiences and our own emotions and what matters to us. And we're coming to this idea that what the hell's going on? We like things that are less real, that are less typically materially seen as real. And what the hell are you supposed to do with that information at 20 years old, man? I think you have to understand that you're in the world, not of the world. You have to go out and do the stuff in the physical world to get by. But really, when you retire into yourself, whether that's when you go to bed or when you wake up in the morning, you have to understand that I am having an experience. I am having an experience in this physical plane, but this is not all there is. There's so much more to reality than just what I can touch and what my human senses can detect. And sort of living with that as a mantra is useful, I think. But it's a question that, it might take me the next 50 years to answer, but I'm excited for it, man.
No, that was good. I like you're in the world and not of the world. I was thinking about the answer for this for a good hour, and my conclusion I came to was, I think you need to get out the lower form, and the way you do that is you block yourself out from it. So I take the example from I think it was Odyssey with Odysseus, and he's in a sailing boat, and he needs to get somewhere, and he comes across these sirens, which are women who are half fish, and the top is this beautiful woman, the top half, and this this story to me represents the lower form of this physical, this lust, and the
Well, that's the thing. Let me just add this extra bit about the sirens. So they're like a mythological creature that would sing, have this beautiful song that would then, and this very attractive upper female body that would lure male sailors into like the rocks to then crash their boats, and they would like eat them or whatever, some shit like that. Which is like it's a temptation symbol. Carry on.
Yeah. And the way that Odysseus and the sailors got past these sirens was the men all put like beeswax. They filled their ears with honey, or filled their ears with some sort of thing that made them not hear the temptation. And Odysseus, he, for some reason, I didn't read it properly, but he strapped himself to the ship, tied round, and he told his men not to untangle him until they were past. And so it was known as the only person that's heard the siren's law and lived past it. And so what I take from that is, well, take the lower form right now of social media, and I mean, you've deleted it, I only go on it for business, and that we've blocked it out. That lower form doesn't exist to us. This kind of physical and lower self and physical world, and we're full of superficialities. It doesn't exist to us. We're not in that world, and now we're able to rise up the forms because of that. And so then the question is, how do you rise up the forms, and how do you then engage with reality? Because we're no longer living in this sort of devilish reality. We have potential to move up. So I think the answer comes with meta skills and like
awareness as well, to notice what the temptation is, and self-control. Yeah, virtues like self-control for sure.
Yeah, I think we develop these metaphysical skills and virtues and stuff like confidence. Like it's quite funny. Tell the story of the courgettes, where you kind of used a meta skill.
Well, yeah, I think the story of the courgettes. I'll say it very briefly. Basically, if you don't go to, like, if you go to a supermarket, you don't have a shopping bag with you, right? And you don't want to buy one of their like plastic shopping bags. Number one, because you don't want to hurt the planet, and number two, you don't want to spend like 15p on it. A quick little cheat code of life is there are vegetable rows that just are boxes and boxes of, like, you know, all your vegetables, your onions, your potatoes, your courgettes, your carrots, all that kind of shit. And usually there's one box on the row that has like 3 vegetables in it that's just about to run out. My tip is to, and I've learned this from the guy I live with, my housemate, one of my best mates, but you take the last few vegetables from one box and put it in another box of like carrots or whatever, if it's carrots, and then you have a box to use that you then take your groceries in, that you then take home and you can recycle, right? It's not against any rules, but it's just an easy way to like seem cool. And I remember, the first time I did it with a girl, she was just like absolutely baffled by the fact that this was something I was allowed to do. But I just played along with it, and no one questions it. And you take your box home, and then you recycle it, in your normal recycling, and you don't have to buy a plastic bag. And it means that I never really go to a supermarket with a bag now, because I know I can just use a vegetable box. So that's I guess that's what's that? That's the meta skill of confidence, and being able to just not be just like confined into rules of how people usually behave, and like the stress of like, I haven't got my shopping bag with me. It's all right, there's loads of boxes around, just grab one. You know what I mean?
It's the spirit of acting like a king to be treated like one that filled you. It's not about the courgettes, it's about the boldness to do that. And that's what being in one of the high realms can do. That you carry around some authority and some power, and that would just kind of manifested in that small thing of the courgettes.
Yeah, what I like about this, it reminds me of something we've talked about a whole lot, and I'll start with your first point about having to kind of avoid the temptations that keep you so stuck and so confined in the material world, and like material desire and all that kind of toxic stuff. And it's the idea of the woman in the red dress. the thing that seems so shiny and glamorous and desirable, but really, when you look at it a bit more deeply, is the thing that you're afraid of and the thing that you need to avoid. And it's like, and that's why the motif and the symbol of the siren is so interesting. That there is so much like that in our world. Whether it's the Instagram reels that you're scrolling through, that each individual one is funny. It's a 15-second, 20-second clip. It's a little bit humorous. It'll entertain you. But if you spend 3 hours of your afternoon just scrolling, frying some circuits in your brain, the reward systems, the dopaminergic system, frying that system, then what are you going to do when you have to put your phone down? You're just gonna want to keep craving that dopamine, and so you'll dip down into this low motivation trough and not be able to do the real meaningful work in your life, and you'll be less present with your family or your friends or your partner or whatever. And that's just one small example. There's that in terms of the food that tastes nice when you eat it in the moment, but really you feel like shit afterwards, or it puts your health in jeopardy and it puts your physique in jeopardy, and eventually you've got heart disease in your 50s and 60s as a consequence of all the times that you indulged in that temptation, and you got caught by the woman in the red dress, or you were led by the siren to the rocks to go and die. All of that story in itself, that's a symbol of that same process of being lured in by something that you think is right for you, but really it's not right for your life. And like you say, you have to find ways to block yourself against it. And the other point I had was, and it's a personal anecdote, and it sounds silly, but fuck it, because that's what this podcast is about. So I had a basketball camp at the beginning of March, I think, and it wasn't my greatest camp. Like I didn't play very well. I didn't love it. We had grunt work in the afternoon that I really struggled to really lock in and sort of and really push myself. So it wasn't like the greatest camp ever, and I sort of didn't really enjoy the social environment, and it was tough, right? But then when the camp ended and I was just pushing out to my car with my sports chair, there was like this beautiful sunset, and I put on some like Bing Crosby tunes from the 1940s that just helped me relax and chill out. And I realized that I'd existed in two so different realities in that one day. There was the competitive, very ego-filled, very testosterone-filled environment of camp, when we're all kind of competing for our position in the social hierarchy in that squad and stuff. And then there's the reality of Joel getting in his car in a sunset, putting on some chilled music, drinking a CBD drink, and getting on the motorway to drive home. And like, they are two different realities. One is so ego attached. One is so grounded in my own ego that it kind of fogs my ability to enjoy the moment and just be present and see the beauty in reality. And then when I come out, the second one is one of beauty, and one of transcendence of the sunset, and one of love and art in the music. And it's just, do you know what I mean? Where it's like it's kind of like I've shifted from one state of being to another. And the more you can live in a state of being that is beautiful to you and that's transcendental and that makes you feel loving and expansive, because they do exist. I'm feeling it now on this podcast, and I often do in our conversations. This state of being, this approach to reality is a real thing. And it's in this metaphysical world, because we can't really define it, we can't pin it down, but it's often hard to describe or measure. We struggle to hold on to it. But I think if you can tune yourself to recognize it and promote how much time you spend in that space, that's what makes life feel worth living. That, I think, is so true. Because I've had it this week, being ill, just lying in my bed watching YouTube, just being stimulated. Like, it doesn't feel good. Whereas today, I've forced myself to go outside and go to a supermarket. I'm sort of coming back to feeling normal again, and just having this conversation on the podcast reminds me, like, life is fucking beautiful, and there is a reality you can live in where that is what you feel to the deepest part of your being. So anyway, that was a long rant, but I think we're on the same lines.
Yeah, I think a very good way to put it is we can choose what is real. We can choose it. It's what we ever give power to. That's the thing that is real. You kind of you've given power to the illness of, well, you don't really have a choice, but like that's the thing that you have to kind of that's what you exist with. Someone that's ill, whereas the whole of the other world hasn't changed. Like, and so maybe it is an internal thing, but like, the physical world doesn't have to be as real as you, like, if you don't want it to be. Like, there's, like, for me, like, something like obesity isn't real, because, like, I don't live in that lower form. Like, the thing itself exists, but, like, it's not existing to me, so it's not real for me. And so you can kind of use that with other things of you can I think you can choose what you make real, what you give power to anyway.
I think a good way of framing it is thinking what in this way, if you saying what you think is real, the way I see that is it's what you decide to value. And we're deciding to value things that aren't typically seen as like real in the material sense of like I can touch this table physically, so it's real. Like we're deciding to value spirituality, psychology, philosophy over the material world and like material values. And it's coming, and it's like value is what do you care about, what do you believe in, what matters. And it's like it's that was the main philosophy of what's his name, the guy who wrote Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, Mark Manson. That's it. That massively best-selling self-help book about his philosophy was right. We need to care about something, so choose what you care about. Don't care about all the bullshit stuff that makes you feel bad. Care about the stuff that matters. And it's also some insight from the book The Courage to Be Disliked comes into this for me. It's like that guy told in that book, he outlines how you shouldn't value what other people think of you. That's not something to value, because if you value that, if you see that as real, if you think, oh, well, other people's opinions, whether it's the stranger that you just randomly meet in the supermarket, or it's your great auntie, or your dad, or your best mate, or that kid from school, or your ex from 10 years ago, whatever, like these people that if we put value on their opinions of us, it constrains our freedom. So that's something as well. On a small scale of how much social anxiety you feel on a daily basis to how you feel about making your life decisions and whether you feel that pressure from friends and family and stuff. It's like, if you put so much value on certain things, that's then going to orient how you feel and the decisions you make, and essentially then your entire life. So you have to, like you say, you have to choose what you think is most real. You have to choose what you think should be valued most. And these are not simple questions, but they're really important ones to ask.
Yeah, I think a lot of things can come from this. You can think of this in the sense of time. Like we're doing this podcast at 4 p.m. I woke up at 10 a.m. And since then, those 6 hours, they're not real. What's real is the adrenaline I get from the cold shower and the clarity of eating my breakfast and the flow state that I was in the coffee shop. What isn't real is the noise in the coffee shop, or the like tiredness of the morning routine, because I haven't valued those things. I haven't kind of given into those things. And you can think about this with meaning of there's this existence that you value and you live, and then that you live through, and then there's just living on itself. And it's like there's a difference between I think I've got the other way around. What I meant to say was there's a difference between just living and existing. Like the guy who's stuck in Plato's cave, who's valuing playing GTA or whatever, and then there's the guy who's living the adventure in the higher form, experience the real things, experiencing more real sort of things. It's like the real adventure versus with the GTA example, with the real adventure versus the sort of fake venture that's played through this video game. And
shall I go? I just wanted to add that an important point to emphasize is the reason that we can have this tendency to sort of resist and remain in Plato's cave is because it's the most comfortable, in inverted commas, the easiest route, right? Leaving the cave is amazing, and it's an adventure, and it's experiencing life firsthand, but it's difficult, right? You're going to experience the whole spectrum of human emotion if you really decide to go out there and live. You're going to face pain, you're going to face rejection, you're going to face people that don't respect you, you're going to face anxiety, you're going to have to overcome things you're afraid of. But the faith part of it, and the real sort of the moral philosophy part of it that you really need to accept if you're going to decide to live your life this way, is that's worth doing, because at least then the feelings you get across that journey and that adventure are real in our definition of what's real. It's the way that a McDonald's meal or a watching pornography or scrolling on the YouTube rabbit hole or whatever, the way that makes you feel is so less real than experiencing the beauty of life firsthand, of seeing a sunset, of engaging in a genuine relationship, of eating food that nourishes you, of going and seeing novel landscapes and stuff. It's so It's so much more real, but it's these things are hard to get, but it's worth it. And that's what's so dangerous, I guess, about the level of convenience in our modern world. Is it's so I think it's easier to stay in Plato's cave, to stay in a simulated version of what life should be like, because there are companies that are profit oriented that find ways to hijack those mechanisms in your brain and keep you in that state of comfortable consumption.
Yeah, there's. I guess a good way to put it is, how alive does it feel? Of the correlation between like how real something is and how alive it makes you feel. That's quite a good one. There's this. If I kind of pivot slightly, but still on this topic, there's a guy called George Berkeley. I think Berkeley's another philosopher. He has the problem that's kind of. I think it's kind of a bit of a meme, but he says, like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one perceives it, does it actually exist? And my answer to that is no. I think you need a perceiver. I think there's no knowledge of something that happened. There's no knowledge of something happening. There's no knowledge of something happening that didn't happen, or that isn't knowledge of that it happened. If I get thirsty and I don't tell anyone, then you don't know that I'm thirsty. Me being thirsty doesn't exist. It only exists to me. And if I then take another example, these are just kind of more thoughts I've had about this whole kind of reality existence thing. People sort of dispute the idea of a soul, but then I thought, well, if a mind exists, then why can't a soul exist? Because the mind, you can't really like God, like that's science tries to prove it, and psychology tries to prove it, but we still don't know really where our thoughts come from. Like, it's still such a mystery. Biology and science come a constraint of that, and so the mind's located inside a brain, but the soul could be located inside a heart. And the mind, it's not material. That's the thing I want to say. It's not material. Okay, this is a bit of a side point, but Hume said an interesting thing about how the brain is as material as the body, arguing that the mind is this sort of idea of like fleeting impressions and ideas that nothing hold together. So essentially, like what is the mind? And it's like it's like these things are thoughts that don't really have a location. Like, it's weird that like there's no material location of, well, like it come from the left side or the right side or the center of my brain. Like, the thought could be like, there's no material location. And you might think, well, there's these different parts of the brain that, like the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, but I don't think those are necessarily where the thought comes from. It just, this thing that arises. I'll let you talk actually, and then I'll carry on.
Yeah, man. It is very interesting, isn't it? That we don't really understand how psychologically we are structured. We understand biological correlates, things that happen in the brain as we're doing certain behaviors, as people feel certain way or think certain things. But there is this dimension to our psychology that can't really be explained. We'll use cognitive mappings and create diagrams and try and understand the neural circuit that gets activated during specific things. But stuff like, how does consciousness emerge and where do our thoughts emerge is still a question that's yet to be answered, which shows us that there is so much yet to be understood about the nature of ourselves and reality. And that's why I love psychology so much and philosophy, because these are questions, they're not questions that are really going to give you answers. I mean, I've started reading a book at the moment called A Life of Meaning, Relocating Your Center of Spiritual Gravity. And it's by a guy called James Hollis, PhD. He's a Jungian analyst. He went on Huberman's podcast, I think like a year ago or something. But anyway, the first point he makes in the book, which just like slaps me in the face. So it's very impressive that like on page 2, he's got something that's really made me think. But he said, you don't want questions to be answered. That's a lie that people tell you, that you want questions to be answered. What he says is you want a large enough question to live your life trying to answer. Because he said having a large enough question gives you a larger life. So it's like meaning is found in asking the biggest questions, not by finding answers to them. And psychology asks big questions. Philosophy is the study of asking big questions about truth and about behavior and about reality. And that's why maybe it's meaningful to us. Mm-hmm. So we should focus on what's not known. It's more interesting, I think, to live life focusing on what you don't know rather than what you do, because what you know already is boring. It's stale. It's done. It's been figured out.
Yeah, I really like that. What was it? You don't want to ask questions, or no, you don't want to answer some questions.
You want to ask larger questions because larger questions lead to a larger life.
Wow. Yeah. There's back on what I was trying to get to. There's a guy called Spinoza, and he has an interesting take that the mind and the body are one. So there's not an independent duality where we've always said like there's we're just the spirit that possesses a body, and they're kind of two different things. But he actually says no, it's the body's just like the object of the human mind, the extension of the mind. And if the body were not objects to the human mind, then his logic is, well, our ideas would belong to another body, or our ideas would belong to another mind. And that kind of fucked my head a bit, because then I was like, okay, there's some truth in that. In that, like, what I find amazing is how I move my arm, and there's no. It really seems like the mind and the body are one there. It really, like, it doesn't seem like two separate things, and the fact that I don't have to go through like a whole thing of waiting for my arm to move. It just moves in like less than a second, like milliseconds, right? And there's no painful waiting or sort of like almost like process of an action to happen. Like it just happens. And also just the fact that, like, well, when I eat something, if I was to eat like loads of carbohydrates, and that would directly proportionally affect my mind of, well, it's going to make my mind slow. It's going to be sluggish. And so, yeah, I just, that made me think, well, are we kind of really one? And then is that maybe the same for the soul, and the soul's just kind of like mind, body, and spirit is just one thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the moving your arm situation is a matter of time perception. It feels instantaneous, but so does all the things that happen in our body, really. When there has to be a small time gap where the message from your motor cortex goes down, your nervous system, and it gets to then a motor neuron that activates the muscles in your arm to move a certain way using changes in the charge due to ions passing through, passing through membranes and shit like that, right? There is a time gap there, but it is interesting because your spirit wouldn't emerge without a physical body. Your spirit wouldn't be experiencing the physical world without it. So that dualism, that separation, is not always justified, I guess. And I think the answer to a lot of these big questions is it's a bit of everything. There is some separation there because we don't feel like all we are is just this physical body. But in the end, without the physical body, we wouldn't be able to have that conscious experience. So they have to be inextricably linked in a certain way.
Yeah, we've done an hour and 10. Would you like to do another point, or shall I go on to the kind of small listener questions?
Let's go with some listener questions to round it up, and you can save your other bits for future.
Okay. There's a guy who his username was something. His username wasn't like a proper name, so I didn't include it here, but he'll know who he is. It reminds me of like one of those people that you said that you used to like Zoom that would like have trouble vaping, or like would ask you like some sort of question like that. I think he's one of those guys. Yeah. He said he some DM looking for advice, and he said, the situation I'm having, to be honest, mate, is a bit hard. I'm at uni. I get teased quite a bit. I have a couple friends, but just feel lonely. I get rejected by girls. I'm a bit of a gooner. I drink and eat too much, and I've become stagnant. I want to get back to studying hard and being the best open-minded Sigma version of myself, but nothing's stuck, and it's so hard. He's asking us for advice. I said that I said that we'd try and give him advice.
I think with questions like this, you can only speak from personal experience without sounding like a fucking dickhead guru like this guy, because obviously I don't. Like I do stupid shit as well. I eat shit that I shouldn't eat. I make bad decisions. I get caught on YouTube rabbit holes. Like I do, all of that. But you have to take small steps to build enough self-esteem so that you don't hate yourself. I think that's so important. I think it's so bloody important, because if you don't hate yourself and you have more self-respect, you're more likely to make better decisions that have your best interest at heart. And then it creates this upward spiral where then you start feeling better. So then you do more things to make yourself feel better, and then that inflates your self-esteem more and more until you're in this positive feedback cycle. That's how it happened for me anyway. Like just start getting good at something that interests you. Don't think about the food or the drinking or whatever it is right now. Be like, well, what interests you? Why do you want to study? Do you just want to study because that sounds like a good thing to do, and that's what your mates do that do well and stuff? Do you actually care about it? Do you actually care about what you're studying? Because if you don't focus on that. Do you want to actually get in good shape? Well, you need a reason to care about it. I started training because I was an insecure little boy, right? And it helped me be a less insecure little boy. And that building of self-esteem and self-respect was huge. And then that went into how I thought about my studies. And then I actually started caring about my studies. I actually started caring about what I was learning about because it was interesting, because it informed my view of the world. And then there was this positive feedback cycle. And then I started enjoying the process of getting better at stuff. So it happens. It happens, it's a spiral, but you have to kickstart it. And the way to kickstart it is to find something you care too much about that you can't not do it. Whether that's something like find a form of exercise you love, or find something you're interested in learning about. Find a small way to build self-esteem and self-respect, because everything comes from that.
Yeah, good answer. I've got something kind of similar in that. I think the best thing to give to him is to get good at something, because he doesn't sound like he's good at anything different but studying necessarily. And I think it gives you something to be excited about. And I guess it's the thing that's just really kind of kept me going. I think hopefully this conversation about when we were talking about the things that are real, that we get to choose what's real, I think this conversation probably helped him a little bit in the kind of spiritual level. But I've been trying to get good at stuff for 2 years or something, and I'm not even that good at stuff yet. I think I'm a decent podcast editor, but there's a long way to go, and I think I'm way behind on being a clothing brand owner, but I'm not even good at that shit yet. But I have hope that I will be, just because I've done enough and I've made progress. And I was hearing the story today. Bumped into a friend, and he was telling me how he sold 50 kegs of beer in this first year of doing a job, and then his next year he sold 1.2 million kegs of beer. And I was like, what the fuck? And that just gave me a little hope, and then now I'm excited for the future again. So I know, just by doing shit, you meet people that are cool and that are on your wavelength. I don't know, I think there's better people to there's more. I like people that have a thing. Do you know what I mean? People that have a thing are just, when you have a thing and people have a thing, it's so much more depth to whatever conversation you're in. There's so much more substance, and so that'll be my answer. And just got to take action, really. There's a guy called DAIKW who has commented on your home not being a physical place, and he had some thoughts to add. He said, I really enjoyed this segment, and I wanted to riff off a bit. I think the idea of home being either a physical or a psychological space is moot. What does moot mean? Good, I guess.
I don't know.
Because it's obviously a blend of both. Assault. Let's see how your stoic idea of a psychological only home holds up if you're homeless with no friends or family, even if you don't consciously think of your family house as home anymore. Its accessibility still offers a sense of subconscious protection. That's actually quite a good question what he said though. What if you're homeless psychologically and have no friends?
So hold on. So the question is, how does my theory run true if somebody's physically homeless?
There's I'll just read out the rest. There's a bit more. he's playing with this idea. So yeah, what if you're like psychologically like homeless or something? Like, what does that look like? So he said the quote at the start really hits. That home is a place you can return to. Even if you don't go, it's knowing it's there and your loved ones are still around provides a kind of stability that is only apparent when it's gone. Also, this made me think of Hannah Ardet's idea of different spheres of life: public, private, and intimate. Home sits in a private sphere, but the feeling of home, the psychological part, I think belongs in the more intimate sphere. One thing tech does is pierce that barrier. What used to be private family moment at home now gets intruded on by outside noise. Not necessarily good or bad, it just changes the texture of home. Lastly, I had a personal memory prop up while I was listening. When I was a kid, I went to a hot air balloon festival with my mum and stepdad. After it ended, we jumped in the car and just followed one of the balloons across the countryside for a while. We had no plan, just wanted to enjoy it together. I remember sitting on the back seat, watching them in front, and feeling like there was nowhere else I longed to be. That's probably the clearest feeling of home I've ever had. Not a place, not a building, just a moment of shared experience.
I like that. It's interesting. Yeah, it's. I mean, that to me says that home is where you feel secure in yourself. In terms of you're engaged in your experience. There's nothing. There's no threat. There's no anxiety. It's pure like joy in being. And I love it. Yeah, I mean, it's a nice sentiment. Well, what question did he have at the end, or is it just?
Oh no, it wasn't a question. It was just hit multiple sort of trains of thought that it made him think of.
Yeah, I'm pleased that somebody heard something that I said and it really makes them think. And I love.
It's your own theory, isn't it?
I love. Yeah, man. I mean, it's beautiful. But then that goes on to him reflecting on a memory that was really pleasant. And it's that question about what does it mean to be psychologically homeless. I mean, that's the opposite of that feeling of security. It's a feeling of insecurity, of instability, I guess. But not in the physical sense. Not in the physical sense if you're homeless or you're struggling to eat or you don't have shelter, which are real problems that many of us are lucky enough to not experience. But the feeling of then not being fed psychologically, I guess. And I don't necessarily feel like I'm psychologically homeless. I just don't. It's a different sense of home to when you're a kid. Because when I guess it's part of me then just growing up and moving into this stage of my life of being a man. But when you're a kid, home is just this very stable, consistent idea. Is you go to school and then at this time you can go back to this place where all your things are and the people you love the most are, and that's where you spend the majority of your time, and that's where you sleep, that's where you rest, that's where you're loved and appreciated. Whereas today it's like, well, I could sleep in multiple different places across a week. But that's staying as someone else is staying where I stay most of the time. Or then I'm at a hotel at a camp, and then I'm at a hotel paid for by basketball because I'm at this camp, or whatever. I'm traveling to an away game. It's like my life is it doesn't have that same stability, I guess, that it had when I was in school, which is maybe a reason why I started thinking about this kind of thing, because that's real. That's like, I don't know where my home is. I don't think that'll be a thing until, like I think I said in the clip, until I'm sort of established with a family and wife and children and stuff.
Yeah, I like this stability aspect. It's like, the psychological theory of home is one where you can be yourself with not even trying to be yourself. It's so like it's so integrated in the present moment. It's so yeah, it's a nice idea. The last one, I only stick to 3 because we're 1 hour 20 minutes now. Someone called Ollie is struggling to uninvite someone from a party and wants advice.
Hey man, this is something that I tangle with a lot in my life. Not necessarily that I want to uninvite people to things, but I think we need to be a bit more blunt about in social situations, right? So many people just pretend to like each other, and it frustrates me, right? So you don't want this person to come to your social function, right? Then just tell them that and see what happens. Don't do it in a dickhead way. Don't, be like, you're a knobhead and, when I'm around you, I want to throw up and you make people feel uncomfortable. Don't do any of that. Just say, look, politely, I've talked to everyone and we made a majority decision that we'd rather you didn't come. And it's for these reasons because, you're a bit rude sometimes, but do it, say it, have a nice temperament when you're doing it, but tell the truth because the truth will set you free. Even if it creates social conflict, which it probably will in that moment, in the long term, you will benefit because that person won't come to your party. And also you'll be around them less. If you like them, then surely you'd want them at your party. So this is someone you don't like. Then why are you pretending to like them? Just politely say to them, I'd rather you weren't there. I'm so confused. I mean, actually, no, I'm not confused because I understand why people do it because we avoid social conflict so much. But my philosophy is the truth will set you free. You don't have to be a dickhead about it. You just have to tell the truth. There are people, I had this one instance where a guy said to me, are we friends, Joel? Right, I'm like, fuck me, that's a scary question. I didn't say that to them, but I thought in my head, I'm like, well, not really. But what I said was, well, I don't think it matters, does it? I said, we do things together. We play a sport together. We get on, we rub along nicely. We don't have to be friends. I'm not going to invite you to go to the pub with me and have a pint, but that's fine because we rub along and we play. That to me was a good interaction. He wasn't upset. I wasn't upset. The truth was told. And that means then that people know where they are with each other. And that's valuable. I feel like I'm ranting here. But anyway, I experienced this a lot with my friend group and stuff. And my advice would always be tell the truth because it will set you free. It might create some conflict initially, but in the long term, you'll get what you ultimately want and need.
Well, you had that incident where someone asked to be on the podcast and then you said, what if you got to talk about the basketball? And it kind of, you said what you wanted to say. It was, the truth was set out there and you kind of respected the answer.
Well, Jake, think about it this way, right? Me and you have had some uncomfortable conversations about our own lives, about things both me and you have done, right? And if there's ever an issue between the two of us, we talk about it, even if it's a bit uncomfortable, even if one of us or both of us have to get quite vulnerable. But the power in that truth is that I feel like I know you very well and you know me very well. And so there's this open space now where we can have open dialogue and we can go to conversational places that others are afraid to go to. And that's why our bond is so strong. And that's why I can rely on you. And that's why I trust you. So in that truth, in that willingness to be vulnerable and talk about uncomfortable shit, we've got a really strong friendship and that's worth it.
I agree. And you think it's a better approach than I remember you said that you and Ryan would just say no to people with no reason and want to normalise that.
I think it's true. I think it's so true. People you need to give an answer to things. Joel, do you want to go to this? No. It's not an insult to you. It's just I don't want to do that.
Joel, can I come to the party?
No, sorry, no. No, it's not. It's just I don't know. It sounds really blunt, but I think it's true. Joel, can you do this? No, I can't. I've gotten busy. Sorry. I feel like that would be fine. A very short response, but a truthful response. Anyway, Good question, though.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone. If you did enjoy this, just leave a review on Spotify. That would be much appreciated. Thank you.